The Treasure of Lima, a curse? A legend? Or the greatest secret still hidden beneath the jungle canopy of Isla del Coco? Discover the untold story, if you dare. Hidden deep in the heart of the Pacific Ocean lies Isla del Coco, a wild, remote island covered in dense jungle and sharp cliffs. For over 200 years, this island has been shrouded in mystery and legend, whispered about by sailors, treasure hunters, and explorers alike. At the center of these stories is the Treasure of Lima, a fortune in gold, jewels, and sacred relics stolen from the Spanish church during a time of rebellion, hidden away by a mutinous crew who vanished without a trace. Many have tried to find this treasure. Some never returned. Others came back with stories of curses, strange warnings, and an island that refuses to give up its secrets. Join me as we dive into the legend, uncover the history, and explore the mysteries surrounding the Treasure of Lima, the greatest lost treasure of the Pacific. They say that somewhere deep in the endless blue of the Pacific, where waves strike the rocks with relentless force, there lies an island unlike any other. An island covered in jungle so thick it swallows sound, and cliffs so steep they break the wind. Its name is Isla del Coco. This is no tropical postcard. There are no tourists, no resorts, no signs of comfort. Only dense wilderness, dangerous wildlife, and clouds that gather like warnings. And hidden beneath the earth, as many believe, lies a treasure of unimaginable worth. The story begins in the year 1820, in Lima, the capital of Spanish-ruled Peru. A city rich in gold, art, and power, but on the verge of collapse. Revolution was spreading. Armed rebels approached from the countryside, and panic took hold in the hearts of rulers. To protect what they valued most, the church's gold, royal jewels, and sacred relics, the authorities decided to secretly evacuate it all. Crates filled with treasures were sealed and quietly taken to the harbor. There, a ship awaited, the Mary Dear. On board was a man named Captain William Thompson, an Englishman hired for his skills and discretion. But as the ship left Lima's shores, carrying golden statues, gem-covered chalices, and emerald-encrusted crosses, something changed. Captain Thompson and his crew began to imagine a different future. A future where that treasure belonged to no king, no priest, or only them. The Mary Dear vanished into the Pacific. And the legend began. It happened just days after the Mary Dear left the port of Callao. The Pacific stretched endlessly around them, no sails on the horizon, no ships in pursuit. Only open sea. And in the hold below, enough gold and jewels to tempt even the most loyal man. Captain William Thompson had made his decision. One by one, under the cover of night, his crew moved quietly through the ship. The soldiers sent to guard the treasure, eliminated. One was thrown overboard while asleep. Another found his wine laced with poison. A third never even saw the knife coming. By morning, the ship was theirs. No witnesses. No turning back. Thompson stood on deck, staring out at the sea as the bodies sank beneath the waves. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't joy. It was cold calculation. He knew what he had done. He had betrayed a crown, defiled sacred treasure, and made enemies of both church and empire. But with that gold, he could disappear. He could start again in a place where names didn't matter and gold spoke louder than lore. Still, he needed time, and a place where no one would ever find them. That's when the idea came, Isla del Coco. a remote, uninhabited island off the coast of what is now Costa Rica. Dense jungle, sharp cliffs, dangerous terrain, no people, no lures. Perfect. The Mary Deer changed course. While the Spanish authorities believed their treasure was on its way to safety, it was already sailing toward secrecy. Toward a burial ground made not of stone, but of roots and earth. Toward an island that would one day be called Cursed. And so began the journey not just of gold, but of obsession, betrayal, and silence. They first saw it at dawn. Through the mist rising off the water, Isla del Coco emerged like a shadow from the deep. Towering cliffs pierced the sky, and waterfalls poured straight from the clouds into the sea. The jungle reached down to the shore like green fingers, thick and wild, untouched by man. There were no signs of life, no birds, no movement, not even the sound of insects. It felt as though the island had been waiting. Captain Thompson gave the order, anchor offshore, lower the small boats. They couldn't risk beaching the Mary Deer. The treasure was too great to leave unguarded. They would land in secret, under the veil of morning fog, and begin the burial. One by one, the men rowed toward the island, carrying chests so heavy it took 3 of them to lift just one. Inside, golden crucifixes, diamond rings, ruby pendants, chalices crusted in emeralds. The stolen wealth of Lima's cathedrals and noble houses. They ventured deep into the jungle, cutting their way through vines and thorns, until they found a clearing, hidden, silent, surrounded by ancient trees. There, they dug. Days passed. The jungle closed behind them like a door. Tropical storms rolled in. The earth turned to mud. Some of the crew whispered that they were being watched, but by what, they couldn't say. By the time the final chest was buried, the men were exhausted, paranoid, and silent. The gold was underground, locked away from the world. Only they knew where. And Thompson made it clear, no maps, no markings, no second chances. Then, without ceremony, they left. No monuments, no clues, just a silent island, and a secret that would grow heavier with every year that passed. But the treasure did not stay forgotten for long. The Mary Deer never made it far. Captain Thompson had planned everything, except for one thing: the Spanish Navy was already looking for them. News of the betrayal had spread faster than expected. Word of a vanished treasure ship, of slaughtered guards, of a captain gone rogue. It was a storm that moved with the wind. Weeks after they left Isla del Coco, sailing north toward the promise of a new life, the HMS Espiritu, a Spanish warship, spotted them near the coast of Central America. There was no chase, no dramatic battle. The Mary Deer was outgunned, outmanned, and out of luck. The Spanish soldiers boarded with weapons drawn. Thompson and his crew didn't resist. There was nothing left to fight for. The treasure? Gone. No trace of it on board. No map. No coordinates. Just silence. Thompson was taken in chains to Panama, along with the remaining crew. There, under Spanish authority, he was accused of theft, mutiny, and murder, a death sentence by any name. Under torture, some of the crew confessed that the treasure had been hidden, somewhere on an island far out at sea. But they couldn't give a name. Or wouldn't. the details blurred. Some claimed they were blindfolded. Others said the captain swore them to secrecy under threat of death. But the Spanish authorities wanted only one man to speak, William Thompson. He was brought before them, beaten but still standing, and asked a single question. "Where is the treasure?" Thompson looked them in the eye and said nothing. Not then. Not ever. The Spanish authorities had a dilemma. The treasure of Lima was gone, vanished. Dozens of crates, statues, relics, and jewels were the king's ransom, now swallowed by the Pacific. And the only man who might know where it was refused to speak. William Thompson, already marked for execution, sat in silence. He watched men die beside him, one by one. His crew, tortured, broken, hanged. Some begged for mercy. Others cursed his name. But Thompson said nothing. Not even when they brought out chains heated by fire. Not even when they promised him a swift death. And that terrified them. A man who doesn't break under pain might still bend under hope. So, the offer came, a bargain. "Lead us to the island," they said. "Take us to the treasure, and we'll spare your life." It was a devil's bargain. But Thompson was no fool. He knew what they truly wanted, and he knew that if he gave them everything, he'd be useful only until the last chest was found. Still, death had grown close. He could feel its breath. So he nodded. They gave him a small vessel, manned by Spanish guards. No weapons. No tools. Just his word and the wide Pacific. For days they sailed, guided only by Thompson's memory and the stars. And then, one morning, through a curtain of mist, Isla del Coco appeared once more. The guards prepared to land, ready to uncover history. But something strange happened. As soon as they reached the shore, Thompson ran. He disappeared into the jungle like smoke, vanishing between the trees. Shouts echoed, weapons fired, but the island swallowed him. He was never seen again. And the treasure? It stayed buried. Years passed. Then decades. But the story never died. Sailors whispered it in taverns from Panama to Port Royal. Merchants spoke of it in secret behind locked doors. Adventurers copied maps by candlelight, all chasing a single rumor that the treasure of Lima still slept on Isla del Coco, untouched, waiting. And so, they came. In 1840, a British expedition tried to land. Their boat was shattered against the rocks. In 1854, a group of treasure hunters from California disappeared in the jungle. Their supplies were later found, soaked in rain, no bodies, no answers. In 1889, a German explorer swore he found evidence of digging, man-made cuts in the cliffs, patterns in the moss. But when he returned months later, they were gone. As if the island had healed itself. They began to call it cursed. Not a curse of ghosts or magic, but something older. Something buried in the roots. In the silence. In the way compasses spun wild in certain coves, or how rain fell only when someone got too close. The Costa Rican government, seeing the growing obsession, declared Isla del Coco a protected natural reserve. No commercial digging. No explosives. No bulldozers. Only feet and hands, and permission no one could get. Yet still, they came. Illegally, quietly, driven not by greed alone, but by something more dangerous. Belief. Because once you hear the story, once you truly believe the gold is real, you stop sleeping at night. And the island knows that. In 1902, nearly a century after William Thompson vanished into the jungle, a worn leather satchel surfaced in a private collection in Liverpool. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with an old wax stamp, was a document no one could explain. It was a map. Not a modern chart, but hand-drawn, faded ink, unfamiliar symbols, and a shape that resembled Isla del Coco. Tiny red marks were scattered across the island's interior, clustered near a ravine in the northern highlands. At the bottom, written in barely legible English, were the words, "What was stolen is not lost, only buried. Wait. Wait, William Thompson." The collector who held it, an eccentric shipping magnate, claimed it was purchased in Havana from a sailor whose grandfather served under Thompson. But the provenance was impossible to prove. Experts debated endlessly. Was it a forgery? A hoax? Or the final clue? To some, it was nothing more than pirate fiction. To others, it was the missing piece of the puzzle. Within a year, 3 separate expeditions were launched. All 3 aimed for the same ravine marked on the map. The first expedition turned back after one member was bitten by a snake. The second lost most of its gear in a flash flood. The third was never heard from again. The map disappeared once more, sold, stolen, lost to time. But a story began to spread that there was a code hidden in the map's drawings. That it was more than just geography, it was a warning. A test. Some believed the red marks weren't the excess here at all. They were graves. By the 1920s, Isla del Coco was no longer just an island. It had become a fixation. Men left families, sold homes, crossed oceans, all for the chance to find gold that may or may not exist. Some came with nothing but shovels. Others with hired crews, stolen maps, and promises to investors they would never be able to keep. And many of them never returned. The jungle grew thick over their camps. Rusted tools lay buried beneath fallen leaves. Waterproof journals, filled with hopeful notes and sketches, were later found abandoned, half-eaten by mold and time. Locals began to whisper over a graveyard in the jungle, not marked by tombstones, but by silence. A narrow trail, barely visible, where boots were last seen but never found again. Where voices once echoed, and then ear didn't. Some explorers spoke of a presence on the island. Not a creature, not a ghost, but something in the way the trees leaned, or how birds stopped singing when someone dug too deep. One man, a Costa Rican guide who had helped 6 expeditions over the years, refused to return. When asked why, he simply said, "The island chooses what it keeps. And what it keeps, it doesn't give back." By mid-century, over 300 expeditions had tried to find the Treasure of Lima. Not one had succeeded. Not a single gold coin, not a relic, not a scrap of proof had ever been recovered. But that only made the legend grow. Because when no one finds it, that means someone still can. By the 1970s, Isla del Coco had become too famous for its own good. Not because someone found the treasure, but because too many people were trying to. Dig sites scarred the land. Trees were felled. Explosives were smuggled in. Even helicopters were used by a few wealthy hunters determined to tear the island apart if that's what it took. Costa Rica had seen enough. In 1978, the government passed strict protections. Isla del Coco was declared a national park, a biological treasure filled with rare species, untouched coral reefs, and ancient forests. Digging? Forbidden. Mining equipment? Banned. Unauthorized landings? Punishable by law. On the surface, it was about ecology. The island was one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. Jacques Cousteau even called it the most beautiful island in the world. But to the believers, it was something else. They said the government knew more than it let on. That deep within official archives, sealed documents confirmed sightings of strange symbols, of collapsed tunnels, of bones in places no one should have been. Some claimed that a small group of officials had once found part of the treasure and sealed it away. That the laws were not just about protecting nature, but about protecting the secret. Still, even with surveillance and legal threats, the island kept drawing people in. Like a flame in the dark. And if you asked them why they risked everything, most said the same thing. Because it's still there. I know it is. In the 21st century, the tools of treasure hunting changed. Shovels and pickaxes were replaced by ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging drones, 3D terrain mapping, and satellite scans. If the treasure was there, logic said, technology would find it. And yet, it didn't. Private investors poured millions into secret expeditions. Disguised as ecological research, small teams arrived under permits, carrying equipment designed to see beneath the surface. They mapped the island inch by inch, scanned caves, measured mineral density. Some even brought small submersibles, searching underwater caves near the cliffs, convinced the treasure had been hidden beneath the sea. Results? Nothing. Data showed anomalies, strange readings underground, unnatural shapes, voids where there shouldn't be empty space. But every time someone tried to dig near them, something went wrong. Heavy rains collapsed dig sites. Equipment failed. Permits were revoked at the last minute. Once, a generator caught fire without explanation. A well-known tech entrepreneur, after months of preparation, left the island in silence. When reporters asked him why he gave up, he said only, "Some places don't want to be found." Others weren't so lucky. In 2013, a small team ignored regulations and tried to excavate a known hotspot marked on Thompson's rumored map. Their boat was confiscated. Fines were issued. 2 men were banned from Costa Rica for life. But the deeper truth remained unchanged. Even with the most advanced tools money could buy, the Treasure of Lima remained invisible. Or worse, protected. As the years rolled on and the treasure remained hidden, a strange thing happened. People began to ask not where the treasure was, but why no one could find it. One theory claimed the entire legend was a lie, that the treasure never left Lima or was intercepted before Thompson ever reached Isla del Coco. Another suggested that Thompson returned in secret years later, recovered the treasure, and lived out his days under a false name in the Caribbean. Then came the forgeries. Maps he discovered in antique shops. Journals with shaky signatures. A rusted dagger from the crew of Mary Dear. all sold to desperate collectors willing to believe, willing to risk. But the most disturbing theory was also the quietest. It whispered that someone had already found the treasure. Not a treasure hunter, not an expedition, but a man or a group who had the knowledge, the access, and the reason to keep it hidden. Because if the world knew the truth, if a $200 million hoard of stolen colonial wealth resurfaced, it would bring chaos. Claims from churches, governments, families of the dead, accusations, legal battles, even war. So maybe the silence wasn't failure. Maybe it was control. One whispered story even claimed that in the 1990s, a satellite photo captured an unusual shine deep in the jungle. Days later, the file vanished from the archives. The engineer who uploaded it, found drowned while kayaking a week later. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe not. Because sometimes, the most terrifying question isn't is the treasure out there? It's, what happens if someone actually finds it? In 2017, deep in an online forum for forgotten histories, a post appeared. No name, no origin, just a scanned image of an old parchment, covered in numbers, markings, and what looked like the topography of Isla del Coco. The image was titled, "To Those Who Still Listen." At first, it was dismissed as a hoax. But someone overlaid the map onto modern satellite imagery, and the fit was near perfect. Elevation lines, rock formations, even the location of now-dried riverbeds matched. But what drew the most attention was a set of 3 intersecting lines, drawn with surgical precision. Where they met, marked with a simple triangle, sat a piece of highland terrain that had never been explored, thanks to near vertical cliffs and thick forest cover. A few users tried tracing the digital trail of the upload, but it led nowhere. The IP address was scrambled. The account was deleted within hours. And yet, screenshots survived. Within days, treasure forums exploded with speculation. Some believed it was the final clue, leaked by a dying historian. Others said it was a trap, a cursed signal meant to lure the desperate. But one man took it seriously. A former military engineer with jungle training and drone access, he flew to Costa Rica under a tourist visa. He never filed an official expedition request. He simply disappeared into the jungle and was never seen again. His drone footage, found later on a recovered memory card, showed something strange. A perfectly round clearing. No trees. No animals. And in the center, a circle of stones. Not natural. Not explained. And marked, barely visible in the dirt, with a single carved letter. T. Over 2 centuries had passed since Captain Thompson vanished into the trees, but Isla del Coco had not gone quiet. If anything, it had grown stranger. Researchers began to notice patterns, not in treasure, but in behavior. Birdsong stopped in certain regions of the island. Monkeys avoided entire stretches of jungle, even when food was abundant. Rainstorms would appear only when certain areas were entered by humans, recorded on camera, time and time again. It was as if the island wasn't just wild. It was aware. Some called it superstition, a product of obsession. But those who stayed long enough, who spent weeks living under its canopy, all came back changed. One geologist described a feeling of being watched, not by an animal or another person, but by the land itself. Another, a botanist, documented plant life growing in intentional patterns, vines curling into loops, moss outlining shapes in the dirt. And always, the sense that something just beyond the next tree was waiting. Then came the most chilling account. A Costa Rican park ranger reported finding a series of shallow holes dug in a remote area. Fresh, recently disturbed, as if someone had started digging and then vanished. Next to the deepest hole, carved into the bark of a tree, was a single phrase in English: "Not yours to take." No one ever claimed responsibility. No permits were filed. No gear was left behind. And perhaps that was the island's final warning. Because after all these years, after drones, maps, legends and blood, the treasure remains untouched. And maybe, just maybe, it's not because no one can find it, but because the island has already decided no one should. In 2021, a retired marine biologist named Luis Herrera arrived on Isla del Coco. He wasn't a treasure hunter. He wasn't chasing gold. He'd been granted a research permit to study coral reefs, but in his downtime, he wandered the island alone, following his instincts and old local stories he had heard as a child. He never said exactly what led him to that place, a narrow ravine choked with moss, behind a veil of vines that looked like a solid wall. But when he stepped through, he found something that stopped his breath. There, half buried in the dirt, under centuries of decay, was the corner of a wooden chest. Ancient, weather-worn, its hinges rusted, its shape nearly lost to time, but unmistakable. Herrera didn't touch it. Instead, he sat beside it for hours, notebook in hand, staring, listening. Later, he would write in his journal, "I found it," or something very close to it. But I felt it in my bones. It wasn't mine. Not mine to take. Not anyone's. And if I opened it, I wouldn't walk off that island. He took no photos. Dug no further. He covered the chest back with earth and leaves. Then he turned around and walked away. When he returned to the mainland, he made no announcements. He told no one, except his sister, who shared the story years later, after his death. And when asked why he didn't take the treasure, she repeated his last words on the subject. Gold fades. But peace is harder to find. Centuries have passed, and the island still holds its secrets tight. Isla del Coco remains a place where the line between myth and reality blurs, where the promise of unimaginable wealth is tangled with whispers of sacrifice, silence, and respect. Many have searched. Some have vanished. Others have returned, changed, haunted by something beyond gold. The Treasure of Lima may still lie buried beneath the jungle floor, wrapped in roots and shadows. Or perhaps it's already been found, hidden away by those who understood its true cost. What is certain is this: the greatest treasure isn't gold or jewels. It's the story itself, the endless pursuit, the mystery that refuses to fade. And maybe, just maybe, the real treasure is the choice. The choice to walk away. To respect the island's warning. To find peace beyond greed. So the question remains, whispered by the ocean wind and rustling leaves. If you stood at the edge of that jungle, knowing what's buried beneath, what would you do? Would you dig? Or would you listen? The treasure still waits, but the island decides who deserves to find it.